Hey, welcome everybody to Freight Forecasting. I'm Michael Vincent, Freight Forecaster here with FreightWaves. Freight Forecasting is a show that we do Thursdays at 4 p.m. Today is a special edition for the GTT, the Global Trade Tech Conference virtual event. And the show is the point of the show is really to talk about data, the different disparate data sets, how you can utilize those, what you need to really freight forecast. What is a freight forecaster? Who should be freight forecasting? What does it look like from the different perspectives of the different industry participants, the shipper, the intermediaries, the carriers, the ports or gateways, and throughout all the different modes, air, rail, ocean, surface, truckload, et cetera, and bring those together. And generally through a sonar picture, because that's what I use here at FreightWaves, but there are other pictures as well. Today, I have the pleasure of having the founder of Turvo and Best of Show winner in our demos yesterday, Jeff Dangelo. He's joining me today. Jeff, welcome to the show. Thank you for being on.
Thanks, Michael. Thanks, FreightWaves, by the way, for putting this on and having us be a part of it.
Excellent, excellent. You're more than welcome. A great demo yesterday. I love what you guys are doing there at Turvo, Jeff, and I love your background and your story. Can you give a little bit of flavor here to give a little perspective to the audience on your background, not only your background, but Turvo, why Turvo, and what you guys are doing?
Yeah, for sure. Thank you. Jeff Dangelo, one of the co-founders of Turvo. So this is my 19th year in supply chain and logistics. We started Turvo 6 years ago, and we had been talking about building a platform like this or a network ecosystem like this for many years before that. And for those that don't know a lot about Turvo, we really looked at the supply chain and said, what are the issues? What are the problems? What are the sort of things that cause people to spend money on things to help their organization? And all these things came down to really one thing, Michael, and it was the fact that there was no common tool set for really people to work together. And so we looked in the sort of consumer world, and we said, what's out there in the consumer world that we can apply to this industry? We saw technologies like Facebook and LinkedIn that really got a lot of traction around these network concepts. And as the technology started graduating and getting better over time, we realized that if we apply a network sort of technology to the ecosystem, there's a whole bunch of problems that we can solve really in an elegant way. And so we've been at this about 6 years, and we work with some of the largest customers in the world and really some of the most forward-thinking CEOs in the world around how do we digitize the supply chain ecosystem. I think that your folks talked about network, and Kendra Phillips and obviously Kendall Scott from Turvo talked about this idea of ecosystem. That's really what we're doing is we're digitizing ecosystems so that organizations can work together in a much better way.
Yeah, it's an excellent way to put it, digitizing the ecosystem of logistics, supply chain more broadly or accurately, I should say. So let me introduce the subject matter of what we're going to talk about today. So we're really talking, it's a number of different things, but really talking future-proofing or improving the resiliency of the supply chains and what you guys are doing there at Turvo. It's a great subject. It's something that you're heavily involved with and something that everybody is very, very interested in, obviously, but really talking about specifically collaborative nature or collaborative efforts and practices between businesses, whether they be competitors or vendors and suppliers to each other, and data transparency and how to prep that data and how to actually make it actionable. We've heard from many industry leaders yesterday and today, and just a quote a few of those to set the stage. Really, Jonathan Wright was a cognitive reengineering practice at IBM. You're talking about the lack of real-time information previously, the lack of real-time collaboration. We maintained our planning based on historical models, historical needs. I remember when I was at Roadway Express many, many years ago, we had sheets of paper that we had printed out charts on, and you had to enter up to 50 different metrics every single day. And we had them historically by every terminal. And as terminal operations managers, and we looked at those to predict what was going to happen on specific days moving forward. Now, that was the early 80s that we were doing that type of stuff. But even then, we saw the need for that data and planning, but it was based all on historical. We're talking about moving forward. Gene Soroka talked about digitization of the port and the port optimizer that they're doing there in the port of LA. Even Heather Sheehan of Awesome was talking about the ability, or the traditional supply chain was not flexible or resilient, and it was exposed during the pandemic. It exposed different industries in different ways, as some saw a huge flex up, some dropped off the grid, et cetera. As you know, some of them were essential and deemed essential, that type of thing. And even going into sonar with Craig Fuller and Zach Strickland, as they were announcing 7.2 and bringing in the new ocean shipments by the top 100 importers, that is real-time data that sonar brings to you, that FreightWaves brings to you, that is ingestible through API, which we'll talk about. And gives you that ability to really benchmark your performance, dispel false negatives and false positives, really monitor what's going on in your vertical and other verticals, different modes, and how they're going to affect your mode today, tomorrow, next week, and predictions out into the future. And what he was talking about were these data sets that we had brought into there that made it even more global. We've had some ocean dashboards and the Freightos Baltic Index as far as the rates, air cargo, et cetera, inside of sonar. But we got more specific with the actual imports by top 100 importers in the United States. This is all data that can feed into what you're talking about. Am I correct, Jeff?
Absolutely. And you think about standardization of data. You know, Michael, we talked about this, I think, off the air. You know, it really starts within the four walls of your organization, really making sure that you have the cleanliness of data. But as you talked about, there needs to be sort of standardization across these different organizations and really in the industry. You know, I guarantee most people that work with, let's say, Walmart have literally 4 or 5 different definitions of who and what Walmart is based off of their spelling, right? Even within the four walls of their organization. So when we talk about all this great data and bringing all this stuff together, it's really, we're not really going to realize the sort of the impact of it in an incredible way until we make sure it's sort of clean, it's standardized, and you can share it with ease, sort of in real time.
Yeah, those are excellent points, and it really speaks to what we're going here. And we're digging a little bit deeper into this subject matter here. You know, even so many different disparate data sets that we ingest here at FreightWaves, bringing that stuff in, and one of the reasons that many of those are next day and not in real time, there's no intraday movement in some of those, is the nature of that. It's not standardized data across the board, as you said, is something that is very important internally. But even if you standardize it internally, that doesn't necessarily mean that it's standardized enough to share with other systems, right?
That's right. And if you're large enough to have multiple systems, and you have to, let's just talk about integrations for a second. You have to integrate across different sort of systems of record, or the fact that many organizations, as they grow, they might buy or purchase systems of record for different parts of their business. Many times those different parts of their business, and I'll give you an example. If I have a trucking company and a 3PL and a brokerage, maybe I'm doing managed transportation. If you look inside each of those different systems, they might all have different definitions of the same data set. And so as you integrate between those systems, you need to sort of have a common data layer that standardizes that set across all of them. And I think unless we do some of those standards internally, again, you're not going to see the real impact.
Yeah, those are solid points. And even past that, you have these anomalous data sets, or these anomalies that happen within data sets where they need to be cleansed at specific times, right? For instance, let me give you an example. I'm sure you understand this, but for the audience, we were seeing an anomaly in a certain section of the country that occurred every week at a specific time and was throwing off some of the data. Now, it wasn't going through publish. We were scrubbing it clean. And what we found was that it was merely a company. Somebody had lost a freight management bid, yet the tenders were going out, and he had to cleanse it. Now, our data scientists, we have 20 PhDs, et cetera, were able to identify this very quickly, so our data going out was not affected by this. But unless you have those, you're not going to see that type of stuff. So scrubbing that data and having it clean and looking for those anomalous events or statistical anomalies is important as well, is it not, Jeff?
Yeah, absolutely. And you have to sort of get into the predictive nature of, when are those anomalies going to happen? What are those anomalies going to be? And sometimes it's trial and error, right? In the beginning, you might not know that this is going to be an issue, right? You might not know that certain data sets might be sort of challenges in the future, right? And so something will spike and then you learn, right? You think about machine learning, you're literally taking a snapshot of all the data sets over time so that the machine starts learning. So once you get that data set, maybe that becomes an anomaly, and you talk about the, sort of the level of confidence will increase over time as you get better and better at teaching the machine really what the outcome should be.
Yeah, that's a very very good point. And not only that machine, but when we talk about siloed data and the siloed data between the different verticals and your different players that are along the supply chain, we also talk about the siloed nature of the people within those organizations and within those different verticals and getting them on board with that data, right? If you get all this data and analyze it and do nothing with it, or don't have the ability to do it, then it's worthless. So can you talk to the siloed nature of people and their acceptance of this data?
Yeah, the larger the organization, obviously, the more challenges you're going to have there, right? We talk about transformation. I was listening to Kendra Phillips, the writer, talk yesterday about what allows them to not only make the technology change within their four walls, but also sort of their ecosystems. And it sort of takes people, it takes process, it takes technology to sort of make these changes. And I think many organizations are set up to really focus on one part of their business at a time versus looking holistically at how do I solve problems within my organization as a whole versus looking at it unit by unit, right? If I'm looking at the asset side versus the transportation management side, even on the shipper side, right? On the shippers have the same silos, especially as they grow and they acquire companies. You have all these siloed technologies that do the same thing. And so if you're looking holistically, you need to be able to drive not only the technology, but the data, the people, the process, to really get the value from the change.
Yeah, absolutely. I couldn't agree more. And we've seen that with the likes of like Maersk recently with their shedding Safe Marine and bringing that in-house, and the freight forwarding in-house, et cetera. That would be an example of really they took the opportunity. The time is right. The environment is very good, obviously, for marine carriers, for maritime carriers, and really took that opportunity to create more efficiencies is the play there, correct?
Yeah, you have sort of this idea of customization internally of services that a lot of companies have done over time. You think about the supply chain, one of the biggest problems for logistics service providers that I've seen, at least covering organizations that I talk to, is this idea of customization of services along the ecosystem. And that drives a lot of customization in the technology, again, the data sets, the services they provide, et cetera. And I think you really have to get organizations with forward-thinking leadership that can say, hey, look, we want to create sort of a productizable service that we can take to market, right, to solve problems in a much more broad way so that we can touch the data set, at the beginning of the supply chain all the way to the end and back, right? Because we we think about things like food traceability, or we think even, you talk about COVID. I didn't want to talk about COVID today, but think about as we get some of the medicine that's related to COVID, and you've got to track that, throughout the ecosystem and supply chain. You got to know where it starts and where it ends. And over the last 5 or 10 years, up until now, technology within the four walls of a company, and then as you extend it beyond the network, it's almost impossible to sort of track that data, and there's no standards around it. And so I think as you start looking holistically, now you have to look at your partners and say, how do we collectively as a group come together and start this standardization layer? And it might involve more insourcing for certain customers. It might involve sort of providing a productizable, non-customized service. So all of these things will be the effect of a lot of the standardization that goes on.
Yeah, as we talk about this standardization, we talk about collaboration between, and I've got some notes here from our previous talks. Our collaboration, we talk about the collaboration between internal verticals, external verticals, and it's obviously essential to make this happen after you've got this standardization, or actually during, I suppose, the standardization of the data sets. You've got to get this collaboration of people over these type of things, internally and externally. What are those hurdles there? You mentioned technologies that provide a wrapper concept and that type of stuff. Can you dive into that a little bit?
Well, if you start with a problem, right, and the problem statement around sort of the standardization starts with a couple different things. Number one is you've got typically organizations buy in silos even within their organization. I think I talked about that before. Mm-hmm. So your sort of asset-based unit is buying technology just for their assets. Your managed transportation is buying just for your managed transportation. Your brokerage is buying for your brokerage. Name your favorite sort of system of record. So that's number one. Number two, in order to solve the problems in between those systems, there might be a point solution or two that organizations buy, right, to solve one or two specific problems, not really looking sort of holistically at how do we bring all these things together. And I'll give you a couple of examples of problems that occur in that, where you might have an asset division that has an available truck, right, available capacity. And in many organizations, to think of 3PLs, that cannot be shared back to the managed transportation group, right, which is why the utilization might be really bad. Think about sort of this historical idea of the fact that not sharing data, Michael, is supposed to be sort of a competitive advantage,
mm-hmm,
right?
Exactly.
In traditional managed transportation brokers, et cetera, I'm not going to be transparent, therefore I want to make more money, right? I don't think the world is going that way. And I think what we find is a lot of organizations try to just monetize that spread, think about brokerage, or think about I want to make as much money on that thing as possible, versus saying, how can I affect the entire ecosystem so all boats rise? And you really have to be forward thinking as an organization and as an executive leadership, whether you're shipper, 3PL, broker, carrier, it doesn't matter, to really look down and say, what does the future look like? If the future is, autonomous vehicles, if it's sensors and IoT everywhere, if it's, people are doing different jobs that maybe not what they do today, and it's mostly technology driven, because as the machine can probably play way more chess than you and I could play.
Right.
Then I think you have to start thinking about how do you set up the entire organization for those 5 or 10 or 15 years down the road, where things are going to be different. And if you're caught now saying, I want to continue to do the things I'm doing today, you're going to get run over. Now, you're also getting competitive pressures, right? I think up until now, you didn't have a lot of digital players, so there was very stagnant sort of innovation in the space. Now, I remember 6 years ago when we started the business, no one used the term collaboration in our industry. No one.
Right.
And now it seems to be everywhere. And people are starting to understand, at least trying to define what collaboration means. And so as we get the market moving in that direction, you're going to see some of the forward-thinking leaders that are saying, I got to get ahead of this. But traditionally they haven't, right? They've been they've been operational businesses that are trying to make it, money and trying to hold their data. And frankly, they're trying to build their own stuff when, in terms of whether it's portals or something else, and they haven't really thought through, a lot of them haven't thought through what is the future of this industry and how do we all sort of get together to make it better.
Yeah, they're kind of stuck in that paradigm that, like you said, that having and keeping a hold of your own data and not sharing with anybody, being kind of walled off, gives you some sort of competitive advantage. But I think people have realized that even the biggest players on the block have about 2% of the 2.5% of the domestic data, and that's really siloed into specific verticals where they really shine, those niche markets that they have. And having that broader market data like you can get through FreightWaves and that transparency is essential even to the biggest players, correct?
Yeah, again, that's an area where all boats rise, right?
Yeah.
And you think about being a part of that data set to help your users to get smarter about when to make the best decision for your company. It's not, to your point, it's not going to be done on a spreadsheet anymore. Right?
No.
It's not going to be done by picking up the phone and saying, what's the price? It's going to be picked out over time by a machine. A machine's going to do the work. A machine's going to book the truck. A machine's going to buy the capacity. A machine's going to do this. And you have to set up your infrastructure to be able to support that. And as a leader, you've got to buy into products, like Sonar. You've got to buy into sort of technologies that can enable and unlock your business in a different way than you've done traditionally.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, so we're talking about hurdles in making this happen in this collaboration, and we've talked about, the paradigms of this is the way we've done it, and many of us grew up in that. I've been in the industry 34 plus years, and so I grew up in those times. Throughout, collaboration was a bad word, right? Now we're talking about this and people are getting it, and that's really the first movement forward is having these disruptors, as I guess you would call yourselves, right? At least 6 years ago, you were certainly a leader in disrupting. But is it more of looking at disruption as more of it's not really a two-sided coin? It kind of is, but it's not a 50-50 split. You can affect that outcome by having these discussions and being accepting of what we're talking about here today, right? I mean, you can either be disrupted or be a disruptor, but that's not necessarily the case, is it, Jeff?
So the only constant in life is change, right? This industry is going to continue to change, and either you're a part of that change and in front of that change, or you're not. And if you're not, you're in a world of hurt. You're going to be in a world of hurt for a long time, or a really short time if someone sort of eats your lunch on the competitive side.
Right.
And so, I think if you gravitate towards the change, if you gravitate towards sort of the future of what technology is allowing us to unlock, right, then I think it's a good thing. If you're sitting still on your horse and you're not going to the automobile, it's not going to be good for business.
Yeah, I don't think it's going to be good for business at all. I agree with you 100%. So hey,
I'm trying to simplify it, right?
No, I get it.
A lot of people, that we talk to, literally want to do the same thing, and they just want to do it faster. And I think the important thing is that, they look at this change as an opportunity for them to not only grow their business, but sort of grow their footprint and impact in the industry.
Yeah, absolutely, absolutely. Let's we've got about 8-7 minutes here, and we want to get to the end prize here. So we're going through the standardization of data is very difficult, obviously, and then the anomalous nature of data, where you've got to have it scrubbed and clean, and it's got to be good data, because the whole thing falls apart, Jeff, does it not, the first time the data is wrong? I mean, when you're selling somebody on the integration of this data and relying on decision making and machine learning, et cetera, when the data is wrong, that all falls apart. But let's go into the prize, which is really the transparency and automation, the AI, the machine learning, the real-time decisions and the actions that can be automated, the predictive powers as well. Let's dive into that.
Yeah, I think that ultimately, AI, ML, we're just scratching the surface, right? Think about what we're finally talking about these concepts. These aren't necessarily new concepts in the industry, at least, universally. We're finally starting to talk about them in the supply chain in a way that can make and add a ton of value. And so I think to your point, one of the biggest problems is how do you build AI or machine learning modeling, right? And on top of bad data sets. You can't, right? To your point, like if you have, 50 versions of Walmart in your system, how many times you deliver to Walmart? I don't know which one. Which Walmart are you talking about, right?
Yeah.
How do you predict sort of the schedule, what it should be? I don't know which one. And so I think the nature of bad data will compound sort of bad AI, bad ML, bad sort of logic that tells the humans what to do or actually makes a decision on behalf of the human, which is even worse. And I think as soon as you put a platform or system or software in front of a human, when the data isn't relevant, that's when they don't trust the data, right? That's when they don't trust the whatever the price is, right? I remember for years we would use tools, and I told you my background. I've been in logistics. This is my 19th year, and we would look at all the different pricing tools that were out there. And every single one of them had a different average price. I don't know. What do you trust? Right? So our guys would literally pick up the phone and just start calling trucks because they didn't trust the price that was sitting in front of them. And part of that comes to bad data sets. Part of it comes to lack of context of why the data is what it is, right? If it's 4 o'clock in the afternoon, it's the historical averages don't matter. I need to understand what supply and demand is at that very second. And so part of data sets to the point of, I'm forgetting the person's name from IBM, around, how do we get more real-time data? And it's not just real-time data, Michael. It's real-time data with context.
Yeah.
Why is the data set what it is? And how do we apply those sort of contextual data points to ML and AI and all these models to help the human make the best decision for their organization?
You've got to have that human sentiment and the expert around those contexts, just exactly like you were talking about, right? For that machine learning to take place, for that artificial intelligence to learn what these contexts are, or to produce this predictive nature in these decision makers. There's a vast variety of data that needs to be in there. To your point, you can't just have $1.32 a mile from point A to point B is what it's going for today. Why is it $1.32, right?
That's right, because the human's going to go talk to their customer, the carrier, or vice versa. The carrier's going to talk to their customer, and they're going to say, "Hey, this is why it is what it is." Right? I think it's about teaching the machine what the intent of the human. Basically, what do they want to do? Right? Think about Watson trying to learn chess. The reason why it got so good at chess is because over time it played so many games. It just knew basically all the strategies. Here's the same thing. The great thing about what we're talking about in terms of AI and ML, you're literally not only giving data, but you're having the human being saying yes or no. You're having the human being operationalize that data within the system of record or operational system that we're using. And then guess what? You learn, right? If they pick one thing based off of the data that they've received, then the system now learns at what probability is a human going to do that again. And I think that's the kind of learnings that we want to do. But again, you can't do all of that unless we really start cleansing, standardizing data, making sure that the data that's coming in front of them is the right data. And then you start with smaller data sets or smaller parts of the business, so you're not trying to impact the whole thing. You're getting it right and teaching the machine how to interpret it.
Yeah, and I imagine there's a lot of trial and error in there, because you've got to have, like you said, you have to have all those different contexts in there. I mean, I'm sitting here listening to you, and I'm thinking about just pricing, and the AI, machine learning, doesn't understand that there is a bottom to the price. There's an operational cost to run that piece of equipment. Even that basic knowledge that you take for granted, machine doesn't know that unless you put that context into there. So building this out once we've crossed all those other hurdles is difficult. So We're seeing some efficiencies from this now. Am I correct? What's the future? What do you think there? We've got a couple minutes left here, Jeff. So where are we at with this right now, in your opinion? What do you see out there, and what does the timeline look forward? Are we going to see trucks autonomously being routed, or even with a driver in them, next year? Or ships? Or what do you see? And I'm not talking about autonomous vehicles, but this machine learning based on these data sets here for the living, breathing supply chain.
You know, my oldest brother has the best line in the world for any question he gets, that he's not 100% sure, right, what's going to happen.
Okay.
He always says, we're closer than we've ever been, right? And
That's a good, safe answer.
Well, I think, and not to say one way or the other, because, you know, I do think, you know, companies are already building autonomous vehicles. You know, we have partners that literally are building autonomous vehicles. You can see them not just in the U.S., but you can see them, you know, sort of being used in different parts of the world.
Sure.
And that's an interesting, you know, whether it's a drone that someone's operating from a remote control, or they're basically on a pattern. You know, we saw some tests where organizations are doing autonomous vehicles inside the ports, right? And that sort of clears out port congestion. It's only going to get better, Michael. Like, it's only going to get, you know, people are going to get smarter, the machines are going to get smarter, and we're going to start seeing more of this autonomous nature. And you have to build sort of for that future. And right now, it's going to be mostly human, right? The human's going to be doing this work. As we get more and more standardization across the industry, as we get better and better technology, you're going to see the machines start taking over a lot of the human work, right? You just are. That happens in any industry, love it or hate it. The companies that do really, really well are the ones that will evolve with the technology. The roles of their company might change, sort of how they do business might change. Their people might get more efficient. Their cost per transaction should go way down. I mean, I look at our customers, that, you know, or the prospects that we talk to, significant sort of the amount of money they spend per transaction, then, you know, we can shrink that significantly.
Hey, Jeff,
so that's going to happen.
Jeff, we got a hard stop in about 15 seconds here, and I wanted to thank you. Very interesting stuff. Thank you so much for being on the show. I'd love to have you on again. Everybody, thank you for watching Freight Forecasting Thursdays at 4. Check out a different wave coming up with John Kingston and Gerald Bateman.